The midnight moon cast silver shadows across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory as Clara James fled barefoot across the rocky terrain, her nightgown torn and bloodied, her lungs burning with every desperate breath. Behind her, the echoes of her husband's drunken rage still rang in her ears, the shattering glass, his thunderous voice, and the crack of his hand against her face that had finally given her the courage to run. It was 1879, and Clara had endured 3 years of marriage to Silas James, a man whose charm had evaporated on their wedding night, replaced by a cruelty that had only grown with each passing season. Tonight had been different, worse than before. The whiskey had fueled something darker in him, something that made Clara believe she wouldn't survive until morning if she stayed. The sharp rocks cut into her bare feet as she ran, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror propelling her forward. The October chill bit through her thin cotton nightgown, and her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. She had no destination, no plan beyond escape. The nearest town was miles away, and the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly before her. Clara stumbled, her foot catching on a jutting rock, and she fell hard against the unyielding ground. Pain shot through her palms and knees as they scraped against the earth. For a moment she lay there, sobbing quietly, her body trembling with cold and fear. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. "Silas," she whispered, terror clutching at her heart. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the fresh pain, ready to run again despite her exhaustion, but the rider who appeared was not her husband. In the moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a tall man atop a chestnut quarter horse. He pulled his mount to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Madam." His voice was deep, but gentle, with none of the slurred anger she had come to associate with men's voices in the night. "Are you hurt?" Clara took a step backward, wary of any man's kindness. "Stay away," she warned, her voice cracking. The stranger approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Hayes Quinn. I've got a ranch about 2 miles east of here." In the silver light, Clara could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong jawline softened by concerned eyes. He wore the typical garb of a cattleman: worn denim, a cotton shirt, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his face. "You're bleeding," he observed, nodding toward her feet. "And it's too cold to be out here dressed like that." Clara glanced down at her nightgown, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. Without hesitation, Hayes shrugged off his heavy wool coat and stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, holding it out to her. Clara hesitated, years of mistrust warring with her desperate situation. A gust of wind decided for her, cutting through her thin nightgown like a knife. She nodded once, and Hayes gently draped the coat around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, horses, and pine. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it tight around her. "You're running from someone," Hayes said. "It wasn't a question." Clara nodded, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. "My husband, he'll kill me if he finds me." Hayes's expression hardened. "Not while I'm here, he won't." He glanced at her battered feet. "You can't walk like that. Will you let me help you?" "My ranch isn't far." Clara hesitated. Trusting a stranger, a man, seemed foolish after everything she'd endured, but the alternative was freezing to death or facing Silas's wrath. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. Hayes nodded, his expression solemn. "May I carry you to my horse? Those feet won't take you another step." After a moment's hesitation, Clara nodded. Hayes moved slowly, telegraphing his movements as he bent and carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, he thought, and she tensed at his touch before relaxing slightly into the warmth of his chest. "I've got you," he murmured, carrying her to his horse. With practiced ease, he mounted with Clara in his arms, settling her sideways across the saddle in front of him. "Hold on to me," he instructed, and after a moment's hesitation, she clutched at his shirt as he urged his horse forward. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic motion of the horse and the warmth of Hayes's body gradually easing some of Clara's fear. She was acutely aware of his arm around her waist, holding her securely but not possessively. "What's your name?" Hayes asked finally, his voice low. "Clara," she replied, then after a pause, "Clara James." "Well, Miss Clara, you're safe now, I promise you that." Clara wanted to believe him. 3 years of broken promises made it difficult, but something in Hayes Quinn's steady voice made her want to trust again. The ranch appeared on the horizon, a sturdy log cabin with a large barn and corral beside it. Smoke curled from the chimney, a beacon of warmth in the cold night. Hayes guided his horse to the hitching post and dismounted before carefully lifting Clara down. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, lives in the small cabin out back," Hayes explained as he carried Clara toward the main house. "She's a good woman, helped raise me after my ma died." The cabin was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. Hayes set Clara gently in a chair near the fire. "Let me fetch Mrs. Abernathy to tend to your feet," he said, but before he could move, there was a knock at the door. Hayes tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed Clara, whose face had gone pale with fear. He opened the door to find Mrs. Abernathy, a plump woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, standing on the porch with a concerned expression. "I saw you ride in with someone," she said, peering past him to where Clara sat huddled by the fire. Her eyes widened at the sight of the battered young woman. "Oh, you poor dear." She bustled past Hayes, her motherly instincts taking over. "What happened to you, child?" Clara's eyes filled with tears as the older woman knelt beside her, examining her bloody feet with gentle hands. "Her husband," Hayes explained tersely, "found her running barefoot across the north pasture." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned in anger. "Well, you're safe now, dearie. Let's get these feet cleaned up and find you some proper clothes." She looked up at Hayes. "Fetch my bag from my cabin, would you, and heat some water." Hayes nodded, grateful for the older woman's presence. Clara needed a woman's comfort right now, not a strange man's, no matter how well-intentioned. While Hayes was gone, Mrs. Abernathy spoke softly to Clara, her gentle voice and capable hands beginning to ease the younger woman's fear. "How long were you married, child?" she asked as she examined the bruise forming on Clara's cheekbone. 3 years, Clara whispered. "He wasn't always like this, or maybe he was and I just didn't see it." Mrs. Abernathy nodded sadly. "It's a tale as old as time, I'm afraid." "My sister suffered the same fate." She patted Clara's hand. "But she got away just like you did, started a new life in Denver." Hayes returned with the medical bag and a pot of hot water. Mrs. Abernathy set to work cleaning Clara's cuts, while Hayes busied himself making coffee, giving the women privacy while remaining close enough to offer help if needed. "These will heal," Mrs. Abernathy pronounced after bandaging Clara's feet, "but you'll need to stay off them for a few days." She glanced at Hayes. "She can have the spare room," Hayes nodded. "Of course, as long as she needs." "I can't impose," Clara protested weakly. "He might come looking for me here." "Let him," Hayes said, his voice hard. "This is Quinland. No man hurts a woman here and walks away unscathed." Mrs. Abernathy gave him a sharp look. "No talk of violence, Hayes Quinn. What this young woman needs is peace and healing." She turned to Clara. "You stay as long as you need, dear. No one will find you here unless you want to be found." After Mrs. Abernathy had helped Clara into a borrowed nightgown and settled her in the spare room. She returned to the main room where Hayes sat staring into the fire, his expression troubled. "That girl's been through hell," Mrs. Abernathy said quietly, sitting across from him. Hayes nodded, his jaw tight. "I've heard about Silas James. Mean drunk with a quick temper, owns the hardware store in Clearwater." "You know him?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, surprised. "Know of him," Hayes corrected. "Enough to know Clara was right to run." He looked up at his housekeeper. "She can stay as long as she needs to." Mrs. Abernathy studied the young rancher's face. She'd helped raise him after his mother died when he was 12, watching him grow from a solemn boy into a principled man. At 30, Hayes Quinn was respected throughout the territory for his fair dealings and hard work, turning his late father's struggling ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region. "You be careful, Hayes," she warned softly. "That girl's been hurt bad by a man she trusted. Don't you go getting any ideas about swooping in to save her." Hayes looked offended. "I would never take advantage, I know you wouldn't," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "Not intentionally, but she's vulnerable and you're a handsome man with a kind heart. Just give her time and space." Hayes nodded, accepting the wisdom in the older woman's words. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, see what I can find out about James, if he's looking for her." "Be discreet," Mrs. Abernathy cautioned, "and get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch." The next few days established a cautious routine. Clara's feet began to heal under Mrs. Abernathy's care, and though she remained jumpy and withdrawn, small glimpses of her true nature began to emerge: a quick wit, a gentle laugh, a natural grace in her movements once she could walk again. Hayes kept his distance, as Mrs. Abernathy had advised, but he couldn't help being drawn to Clara. He found reasons to be in the house when normally he'd be working with his cattle or horses. He brought wildflowers from the prairie and left them in a jar on the kitchen table. He told stories at dinner that made Clara smile, treasuring each one like a rare gift. A week after Clara's arrival, Hayes returned from town with troubling news. Silas James was searching for his wife, telling anyone who would listen that she had stolen money from him before running away. Few believed him. Silas's reputation for drunken violence was well known, but the accusation had given him a pretext to demand the sheriff's assistance in finding her. "The sheriff's a good man," Hayes assured Clara as they sat at the dinner table, Mrs. Abernathy serving her famous venison stew. "He knows James's character, but he has to at least look like he's investigating." Clara's hands trembled as she set down her spoon. "I should leave. I'm putting you both in danger by staying here." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "Where would you go, child?" "With no money and winter coming on, Mrs. Abernathy's right," Hayes said gently. "You're safer here than anywhere else. My men are loyal. They won't say a word about you being here, even if asked directly." Clara looked between them, tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you both being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. "We know enough. We know you're a good person who's been dealt a bad hand. That's enough reason to help." Hayes nodded in agreement, though his reasons for wanting Clara to stay were becoming increasingly complicated. In just a week, he'd grown accustomed to her presence in his home, to her soft voice and gentle manner. He found himself thinking of her throughout the day, wondering if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she was smiling. "Besides," he added, "you've been helping Mrs. Abernathy with the cooking and mending. I'd say you're earning your keep just fine." Clara managed a small smile. "It's the least I can do." She hesitated, then added, "I used to dream of having a place like this, somewhere quiet with open spaces and good people." Hayes met her eyes across the table, something unspoken passing between them. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like, Clara. This place could use a woman's touch beyond what Mrs. Abernathy can manage with her arthritis." Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow at him but said nothing, hiding her smile behind her napkin. As the days turned into weeks, Clara gradually became a part of life at the Quinn Ranch. She took over most of the cooking and housekeeping, insisting that Mrs. Abernathy rest her aching joints. She learned to make soap and candles, skills she'd never needed as the wife of a shopkeeper. She even began to venture outside, first just to sit on the porch in the autumn sunshine, then to walk around the yard, and eventually to help gather eggs from the chicken coop. Hayes watched her transformation with quiet admiration. The frightened woman he'd found barefoot on the prairie was emerging from her shell, revealing a strength and resilience he found captivating. He kept his promise to give her space, never pressuring her, never making her feel that his help came with expectations. But he couldn't deny, at least to himself, that he was falling in love with Clara James. November brought the first heavy snow, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. Clara stood at the window of the main cabin, watching the snowflakes dance in the morning light, when Hayes came in from tending the livestock. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, stamping the snow from his boots. Clara nodded, smiling. "I've always loved the first snow. Everything looks so clean and new." Hayes hung his coat and hat by the door, then came to stand beside her at the window. "My mother used to say that snow was God's way of giving the world a fresh start." Clara glanced up at him, noting the wistful expression on his face. "You still miss her?" "Every day," Hayes admitted. "She was the heart of this place. After she died, my father just existed. The ranch started failing. He drank too much." He paused. "He never raised a hand to her, though, or to me. The drink just made him sad, not mean." Clara turned back to the window. "Silas was mean before the drink. The whiskey just gave him an excuse." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I should have seen it sooner. There were signs during our courtship, little flashes of temper, the way he spoke about his mother." Hayes wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but he restrained himself. "It's not your fault, Clara. Men like that are good at hiding their true nature until they have what they want." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I was so desperate to escape my father's house. He wanted me to marry the minister, a man 40 years my senior. Silas seemed like salvation in comparison." She gave a bitter laugh, out of the frying pan into the fire. "And now?" Hayes asked softly. "Where are you now?" Clara turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. "Somewhere I never expected to be. Somewhere safe." She hesitated, then added in a whisper, "Somewhere I'm afraid to trust because it seems too good to be true." Hayes took a cautious step closer. "I know you have no reason to trust a man's word, but I swear to you, Clara, you are safe here. Not just from Silas, but from any expectations or demands." Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she took a deep breath. "Thank you for everything." Hayes nodded, fighting the urge to touch her cheek, to draw her into his arms. "I should check on the north pasture fence. The snow might have brought down some branches." As he turned to go, Clara surprised him by touching his arm. "Hayes, would you teach me to ride when the weather clears? I never learned, and I think it might be a useful skill." Hayes felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. "I'd be honored to teach you, Clara." The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days later, the snow stopped and the sun emerged, creating a perfect winter day. Hayes found Clara in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with flour-covered hands. "Weather's cleared," he announced. "Perfect day for your first riding lesson if you're still interested." Clara's face lit up. "Really, now?" Hayes nodded. "The bread can wait, can't it?" Clara looked down at the dough, then back at Hayes, a mischievous smile playing at her lips. "I suppose it can rise a bit longer." She washed her hands and reached for her borrowed coat, one of Mrs. Abernathy's that was slightly too large but warm enough. Hayes led her to the barn, where he had already saddled 2 horses, his chestnut gelding, Thunder, and a gentle Palomino mare named Sunny. "This is Sunny," he said, stroking the mare's golden neck. "She's got the sweetest temperament of any horse I've ever known, perfect for a beginner." Clara approached the mare cautiously, her hand outstretched. Sunny nickered softly and nuzzled Clara's palm. "She likes you," Hayes observed, pleased. "That's a good start." He spent the next half hour teaching Clara the basics of horsemanship, how to approach a horse, how to mount and dismount, how to hold the reins properly. She was a quick study, listening attentively and following his instructions without fear. "You're a natural," Hayes praised as Clara guided Sunny in a circle around the corral. "Most beginners are much more nervous." Clara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made Hayes's heart skip. "I think Sunny is doing most of the work. She seems to know what I want before I do." "The best horses are like that," Hayes agreed. "They can read their riders better than most people can read books." By the end of the lesson, Clara was riding confidently around the corral, her back straight, her hands steady on the reins. The color in her cheeks and the sparkle in her eyes made her look years younger, closer to her true age of 23 than the careworn woman Hayes had found on the prairie. "Can we go outside the corral?" Clara asked eagerly. "Just a short ride." Hayes hesitated, concerned about her safety but unwilling to dampen her newfound enthusiasm. "All right, but stay close to me. The snow can hide holes and rocks that might trip up Sunny." They rode side by side through the snowy ranch yard and onto the open prairie beyond. Clara's face was a picture of wonder as she took in the vast expanse of white, broken only by the dark lines of distant trees and the blue arc of the sky above. "I've never felt so free," she confessed, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "Like I could ride forever and leave everything behind." Hayes watched her, memorizing the way the winter sun caught in her hair, the graceful line of her neck, the delicate curve of her smile. "You could, you know," he said softly. "Leave everything behind, start fresh somewhere." Clara looked over at him, her expression sobering. "I've thought about it, going to Denver or even California, somewhere Silas would never find me." Hayes felt a pang at the thought of her leaving, but he nodded. "If that's what you want, I'll help you get there safely." Clara studied his face for a long moment. "What do you want, Hayes?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years. He'd been so focused on keeping the ranch going, on living up to his father's legacy, that he'd rarely considered his own wants beyond the success of his business. "I want—" he began, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to be happy and safe, Clara, whether that's here or elsewhere." Clara guided Sunny closer to Thunder until the horses were walking side by side, their riders almost touching. "And if I said I might be happiest here, what then?" Hayes's heart thundered in his chest. "Then I'd say you're welcome to stay as long as you like. The ranch could use someone like you." He swallowed hard, then added, "I could use someone like you." Clara's eyes widened slightly, and for a terrible moment, Hayes feared he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she smiled, a small, shy smile that held more promise than words could express. "We should head back," she said softly. "The bread will be over-risen." Hayes nodded, relief and hope mingling in his chest. "Race you to the barn," he suggested impulsively. Clara laughed, the sound bright and clear in the winter air. "You're on." She urged Sunny forward, and the mare responded eagerly, breaking into a trot, and then a canter across the snow-covered ground. Hayes followed, deliberately holding Thunder back to let Clara win, As they approached the barn, the sound of an approaching wagon made them both pull up short. Hayes instinctively moved his horse in front of Clara's, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. A wagon came into view, driven by Sheriff Cooper, a grizzled veteran of the frontier with a reputation for fairness. Beside him sat a man Hayes recognized immediately from his trips to town, Silas James. Clara gasped, her face draining of color. "Silas," she whispered, her voice trembling. Hayes reached across to touch her arm. "Stay behind me. Don't say anything unless I tell you to." The wagon pulled to a stop in front of them. Sheriff Cooper nodded a greeting. "Hayes, been a while." "Sheriff," Hayes acknowledged, keeping his voice neutral. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Cooper gestured to Silas, who was glaring at Clara with undisguised rage. "Mr. James here says his wife ran away from home. Says he heard she might be staying at your ranch." Silas stood up in the wagon, pointing an accusing finger at Clara. "There she is. My wife, the thief who stole $50 from my strongbox before running off like a coward." Hayes felt Clara trembling beside him. He kept his eyes on the sheriff. "This woman came to my ranch seeking refuge, Sheriff. She was barefoot and bleeding, running for her life from a man who beat her. I offered her shelter, as any decent man would do." Sheriff Cooper's weathered face gave nothing away. "That true, Mrs. James? Did your husband strike you?" Before Clara could answer, Silas cut in. "She's clumsy, always falling and hurting herself, then blaming me for it. She's not right in the head, Sheriff. Needs a firm hand." Hayes felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Clara, show the sheriff your feet." Clara hesitated, then slowly pulled up her skirt just enough to reveal her ankles and feet, still bearing the healing scars from her desperate flight across the rocky terrain. "Got those running barefoot in the middle of the night," Hayes explained. "Running from him." Sheriff Cooper's expression hardened as he took in the evidence of Clara's ordeal. He turned to Silas. "You said she fell, Mr. James. Those don't look like injuries from a fall to me." Silas's face darkened. "She's my wife, Sheriff. By law, I have the right to discipline her as I see fit. Now I demand you bring her back to town with us." Sheriff Cooper was quiet for a long moment, looking between Silas, Hayes, and Clara. Finally, he sighed and turned to Clara. "Mrs. James, did your husband hit you?" Clara straightened her spine, meeting the sheriff's eyes directly. "Yes. Many times over the past 3 years. The night I ran, he threatened to kill me, said he'd put me in the ground where I belonged." Silas lunged forward, nearly falling out of the wagon. "She's lying." "Clara, get in this wagon right now, or I swear to God—" "That's enough," Sheriff Cooper interrupted, his hand moving to his own pistol. "Mr. James, I came out here to investigate your claim about stolen money. Instead, I'm hearing credible allegations of abuse from your wife. She has no proof." Silas snarled. "Those feet are proof enough for me," the sheriff replied evenly. He turned to Clara again. "Mrs. James, do you wish to file charges against your husband for assault?" Clara looked stunned at the question. Can I do that?" "You can," Sheriff Cooper confirmed. "Won't be easy to make it stick, but you can try." "Or," Hayes interjected, "you could grant her a divorce on grounds of cruelty. That would be simpler, wouldn't it, Sheriff?" Sheriff Cooper nodded slowly. "It would. Judge Reynolds has granted such divorces before when the evidence was clear." He looked at Clara. "Is that what you want, Mrs. James? A divorce?" Clara nodded, her voice steady despite her pale face. "Yes, I want a divorce. I want to be free of him." Silas's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore, after everything I've done for you." He lunged again, this time managing to jump down from the wagon before the sheriff could stop him. Hayes was faster, dismounting in one fluid motion and stepping between Silas and Clara. "That's close enough, James." Silas was a large man, heavy with the soft fat of a townsman who drank too much. He towered over Hayes by several inches, using his bulk to try to intimidate the younger man. "This isn't your business, Quinn. That's my wife, and I'm taking her home." Hayes didn't budge. "No, you're not. Clara has made her choice. She's staying here." Silas sneered. "So that's how it is. You've been rutting with my wife, have you? Taking what's mine?" Hayes's control snapped. His fist connected with Silas's jaw before he even realized he'd thrown the punch. Silas staggered backward, shocked by the sudden assault, then roared with rage and charged forward. The two men grappled in the snow, Silas's greater weight against Hayes's rancher strength. For a moment, Silas gained the upper hand, pinning Hayes beneath him and landing a heavy blow to his ribs. "Stop it, both of you," Sheriff Cooper shouted, drawing his pistol. "Break it up now, or I'll arrest you both." Neither man listened. Silas had his hands around Hayes's throat now, squeezing with drunken strength. Hayes bucked and twisted, trying to dislodge the heavier man, spots dancing before his eyes as his air was cut off. Suddenly, there was a crack like thunder and Silas froze. Hayes gasped for air as the pressure on his throat released. Clara stood a few feet away, the sheriff's shotgun in her hands, smoke still curling from the barrel. She had fired into the air, but now she leveled the weapon at Silas, her hand steady. "Get off him," she commanded, her voice cold and clear. Now, Silas stared at his wife in disbelief. "You wouldn't dare." Clara's eyes narrowed. 3 years, Silas, 3 years of your fists and your belt. 3 years of terror. Try me." Something in her voice, a steel that had been forged in the fire of her suffering, made Silas believe her. He slowly raised his hands and backed away from Hayes. Sheriff Cooper moved quickly, taking the shotgun from Clara and training his own pistol on Silas. "Mr. James, you're under arrest for assault and attempted murder." "What?" Silas spluttered. "That's absurd. She's my wife." "And I just watched you try to strangle a man to death," the sheriff replied coolly. "Turn around, hands behind your back." As the sheriff secured Silas with handcuffs, Hayes got to his feet, rubbing his bruised throat. Clara rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, touching his face with gentle fingers. Hayes nodded, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "I'm fine. You saved my life." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I was so afraid when I saw his hands around your throat." Hayes caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "You were incredible, bravest thing I've ever seen." Sheriff Cooper cleared his throat, interrupting their moment. "I need to get this one back to town and into a cell," he said, nodding toward Silas, who stood sullen and handcuffed by the wagon. "Mrs. James, I'll need you to come to town in the next few days to give a formal statement, both about today and about the abuse." Clara nodded, drawing strength from Hayes's presence beside her. "I'll be there, and I want to file for divorce immediately," the sheriff nodded. "I'll have the papers ready. Quinn, you take care of her." Hayes straightened, meeting the older man's eyes. "With my life, Sheriff." After the wagon disappeared down the road, Clara and Hayes stood in silence for a long moment, the events of the day settling around them like the snow that had begun to fall again. "Are you really all right?" Clara asked, touching Hayes's throat where bruises were already forming. Hayes caught her hand and held it. "I'm fine. More concerned about you. That couldn't have been easy facing him like that." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes clear and steady. "It wasn't, but when I saw him hurting you, something changed. I wasn't afraid anymore, I was angry. And I knew I wouldn't let him hurt anyone else I cared about." Hayes's heart thundered at her words. "You care about me," Clara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "Of course I do. You saved my life, Hayes Quinn. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You showed me that not all men are like Silas." Hayes took a step closer, drawn to her like a moth to flame. "Clara, I don't want you to feel obligated. If you want to leave once the divorce is final, start fresh somewhere else. I'll understand." Clara shook her head, snow gathering in her dark hair like a crown of stars. "I don't want to leave, not unless—" She hesitated. "Not unless you want me to, I don't," Hayes said quickly, honestly. "I want you to stay, I want—" He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara. I know it's too soon, and I know you've been hurt, and I'll wait as long as you need, but I wanted you to know." Clara's eyes widened, a blush spreading across her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. "It isn't too soon," she whispered. "Not when you know something is right." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm falling in love with you too, Hayes. You make me feel safe, but more than that, you make me feel strong." Hayes cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle as a prayer. "May I kiss you, Clara?" Clara nodded, rising on tiptoes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss as soft as the falling snow, tentative at first, then deepening as Clara wrapped her arms around Hayes's neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Build a life with me here." Clara smiled, snow melting on her eyelashes like tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." 6 months later, with spring painting the prairie in wildflowers and new grass, Clara Quinn stood on the porch of the ranch house, her home, now watching her husband work with a new colt in the corral. The gold band on her finger caught the sunlight, still new enough to make her smile every time she noticed it. The divorce had been granted quickly, hastened by Silas's conviction for assault. He would spend 5 years in the territorial prison, enough time for Clara to build a new life without looking over her shoulder. She and Hayes had married in a simple ceremony in town, with Mrs. Abernathy, Sheriff Cooper, and a few of the ranch hands as witnesses. Clara wore a new dress of pale blue, her first real gift from Hayes, and carried wildflowers he had picked for her that morning. Now, as Hayes noticed her watching and waved, his smile as bright as the spring sun, Clara felt a completeness she had never known before. The nightmare of her first marriage seemed like a distant shadow, unable to touch the joy she had found in Hayes's arms. He secured the colt and jogged over to her, catching her in an embrace that lifted her off her feet. "What are you doing out here?" "I thought you were baking pies for the church social tomorrow." Clara laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "The pies are cooling. I came to tell you something." Hayes set her down, his eyes curious. "What is it?" Clara took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, still flat, but harboring their most precious secret. "We're going to have a baby, Hayes, in the winter." Hayes's face transformed with wonder and joy. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her middle, his strong arms encircling her waist. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Our family," she corrected gently. "Our future." Hayes stood and swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the house just as he had carried her on that fateful night when she ran barefoot from danger into his life. But this time, instead of fear in her eyes, there was only love and the promise of all the days to come. "I love you, Clara Quinn," he murmured against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, knowing with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but her true home in the heart of the man who had wrapped her in his coat and carried her home on a cold Wyoming night.